So these materials, many of them, by the way, and this is a really great resource, Gene, if someone could put that in the chat, 475 Building Supply in Brooklyn, New York, is the premier resource for all of these things that you're looking at right here. Okay, this is a peel and stick air sealing vapor open membrane that you wrap the entire window and door buck in, this Solitex stuff. Okay, and then you can see down here there's a special tape right there that tapes off to this stuff. These are felty. They're not, petrochemical plasticky tapes. They're felty. And this part of the tape tapes off to that. And then it's got a layer of mesh here coming back this way, if you can see that. And what my buddy Graham here is doing is he's going around and letting in. We call this process letting in. He's letting in that air sealing tape with a thin layer of plaster and connecting it back to the hempcrete, right? So here where he's finished, we've got this tape buried in here. It's sticky taped off to this peel and stick Solitex, Mento membrane. And then the plaster mesh right there is what helps bond the plaster to that detail and then back to the wall, right? So now, once they put the windows in, this is the Cape Cod Hemp House, by the way, you guys. This is a project that we worked on with Hempstone back in 2021. Another great resource too. They have a great website, Cape Cod Hemp House, and they were also just written up in the New York Times. And funny segue, I was giving Jean her flowers in the last group for attacking rabidly the misinformation on that post about the 3D printed hempcrete failing, which is absolutely not true. And that got emailed to me by someone that I know who said, "Oh, this isn't good for hempcrete." And I said, "Jeff, first of all, that was not true. And second of all, I'm pretty sure more people read this publication." And I gave him the link to the article for this one. But anyway, this is the Cape Cod Hemp House, super high-end home. Again, in Massachusetts, where he was able to get subsidies for hitting these performance targets. So this is a modern, combination of high-performance passive house air sealing, basically, with the wonderful hempcrete material that is natural and healthy and simple, right? So in the roof here, if you look above, right there where my cursor is, there is another very complicated layer and combination of membranes to create the air sealing layer in the roof, which again is taped off with this same tape with the plaster mesh embedded so that it can be folded down and let in. So we went up then in that man lift and we did this same letting in process around the entire soffit of the roof to create that air sealing layer, so that once we put the plaster on, because plaster is a wonderful natural airtight vapor open assembly. If Tim was here, he'd be jumping out of his skin right now to jump in on that comment. And he would argue that there's ways to do this without, having to use these tapes.
He's here.
That may be true. But this is a method, again, where we're combining high performance building techniques with traditional lime plaster to maintain that air seal all the way around the wall, right? And again, lime plaster does a wonderful job of being airtight and vapor open. That's why we use it. But if you're going to take it to the extent of making sure that you're sealing off all airflow, you need to go a little harder around window and door openings and penetrations, right? So again, this is all relative to whether or not someone wants passive house performance. Playing devil's advocate, you are going to get the performance that you want out of passive house when you use hempcrete. It's up to you and the client and whatever subsidies might be available to you, that if you are being required to show that you're hitting the air exchanges per hour, that's how it's verified. That's how passive house is verified. They put a blower fan on the door and they measure how many air exchanges per hour, and you've got to be below, I think it's like 0.6 air exchanges per hour to hit passive house performance. If you need to do that to get a subsidy, then you're going to have to go a little harder around the doors and windows and all the other penetrations to make sure that you have zero air leakage. Again, when someone says that to you, though, when someone brings it up in a conversation with a client or a homeowner, hey, I'd really like to hit passive house. The question is, do you need to hit passive house? Why do you need to hit passive house? Okay, you get money for it. Great. Then we'll do all this stuff. Or are you just interested in the performance of passive house because you will absolutely get that performance that you want in terms of energy consumption when you're using hempcrete? So it's a good way, again, another tool for you all when you're having these conversations with clients and homeowners to help steer their thinking away from having to go through the pain of doing all this crap around the windows and doors. Okay. So, again, there's many products. 475 Building Supply is an excellent resource for all this stuff. And this tape in particular, I think they don't carry anymore, but they do sell this tape, and you can buy plaster mesh and you can very easily make this tape on your own. And again, you handle your air tightness ideally on both sides. So you repeat this detail on the inside up around the soffit and around the window and door openings when you're doing your base coat of interior plaster as well. In this case, the Cape Cod hemp house, you can see all these little blue dots all along the wall. Each one of those is a an $8 12-inch long stainless steel screw that had to be pre-installed. There were thousands of them, so that when they went to put their rain screen detail on, they had anchorage. These are all back into the stud work. This house is on the water in Cape Cod. They were worried about, the salinity of the ocean air and the moisture, being carried in and out of this house, having a great deal of salinity in it. So, or a high salinity content. So they were worried about that. But again, in this case, what they did was what you're seeing, this base coat of plaster is 1/2 inch thick, and we actually sprayed it on. That was their air sealing layer. And then they went on top of that and added furring strips vertically so that they could put the same, I was about to say something nasty, the same cedar shake shingle that every house on Cape Cod has on it. So walking down the beach past this house, you're never going to know it's hempcrete. But behind those cedar shake shingles is the air sealing layer, which in this case was lime plaster. The argument there being, and Tim would back me up, that using lime plaster as your air seal for the exterior is going to be much more durable and longer lasting than using a Mento fabric or something like what we did for Lower Sioux. Now, again, the reason why we chose that material for Lower Sioux was to keep it as cost conscious as possible. And they were able to build that house for around $200,000, which is under, I believe, just a little bit over $100 a square foot. Michael's house, this Cape Cod hemp house, was in that New York Times article and quoted as being $1,200 per square foot of construction. So, again, there are ways to get your air seal without having to do lime plaster. But again, and Tim would argue rightfully that it is the appropriate way to air seal on the exterior of hempcrete. I heard a comment there. Tim's jumping out of his skin, I'm sure.
Well, no, Cam. Not really, Cameron, because I always knew that. So it's nothing new to me. But on the other end, when I took the hempcrete class that Will Stanwyck was teaching over in Pennsylvania late summer, they did a blower test on a cast-in-place building over there and recorded it, and it was leaking like a sieve a little bit, and he goes, and then we put a plaster coat on the outside, and we weren't done doing it on the inside, and they came back and did another one, and he goes, it went to nothing. It was it was it was putting it under a vacuum pretty much at that point in time. So he was amazed that just one coat of plaster would close it in. What I've been seeing in all of our projects is we've gotten rid of all of it. We're way off to the side of get rid of all conventional thought and let the material take care of itself. And we're finding that the lime plaster at a inch thick is actually like growing in and around, and it's growing. It's, swelling a little bit as it turns into stone. And so we don't have any cracks around any of our windows or anything like that. So just trying to see what is taking place. And, but just to say, That's over there in Europe. They have to do another barrier on the outside, like that mesh you were talking, just because that's code over any sort of framing, remember? And they spray their plaster directly onto it, the lime, or they apply it directly onto it. It's that rigid. It's got an open pore surface. So it works really good in that scenario. So with that sprayed in application going against it on one side and then being able to come back and even plaster it on the other side, it's plaster cost vary per square foot from one part of the country to the next.
For sure.
Here in Texas, it's 9 to 12 a square foot, and that's just what it is. If you think you're going to get 20, you might as well just keep on driving. Right? Right. I'll tell you that. And so, but anyways, I just wanted to say that about the air tightness with the plaster system.
It does what you need it to do, for sure. Exactly. And I will preface that with, or excuse me, I'll back up that statement about Michael's house being $1,200 per square foot, finished cost for that build. There are so many other things other than the hempcrete and lime plaster that went into that. And it is not fair to say that just because he did exterior lime plaster, it got to that amount of money. That is not at all true. And again, I agree with Tim. When I've done the homework of figuring out what a lime plaster finish should cost, even with a nice profit in there, it's somewhere around $9 to $12 per square foot of finish. And that's if you're hiring someone like Tim, who's a professional and really knows what they're doing. In our neck of the woods, Tim, some of the really high-end plasterers, they're doing, Venetian plaster for people's range hoods in their $100,000 kitchens in New Jersey. And they're charging ridiculous amounts of money for lime plaster finishes. So, but finding ways, and in this case, what we did, and you'll see a little bit more about this in the next couple slides, particular to the project at Hillside, spray application. Again, I know Tim has his opinions on that as far as occupational hazard, which is 100% valid. But there are ways for us to commercialize the installation of lime plaster finishes, beyond the hawk and trowel, heritage masonry, type approach that we have here. And that's fine. And that's not, again, a condemnation of what's happening or the work that someone like Tim does. It's just the reality, you guys, of the fact that lime plaster is not a super, contemporary, a very popular contemporary finish right now, right? And the people that are doing what looks like lime plaster in stucco, that's basically toothpaste that comes out of a tube from the hardware store that's polymer fortified that you can, use and abuse and install when it's freezing and all kinds of stuff. So, traditional lime plastering, again, is and I'll share with you David's comment from Hillside. That's what he thinks is what is holding back, more developers picking up and running with hempcrete. If we can get to a point where we have really good solutions like, the work that Tim does for installing a functional lime plaster finish, or clay plaster on the inside type of finish, then we're really moving in a direction that makes it more attractive to a larger developer. I'm going to go on to another slide, Tim. So if you have any other thoughts here, I'll leave it here.
Just I was going to note here in the notes on the chat, I sprayed lime and clay plasters for 6 years, and I found that trying to protect the finished wall surfaces and the amount of plastic I went through, that we actually went back to doing it hawk and trowel. And with our mix of materials that we have for flow in our material that we shoot for, we're actually faster. And the only thing we use now for covering any finished wall surface is 2-inch masking tape, which is cheap. There are both those different benefits. I found when we were spraying is that we became so efficient also that we didn't have enough work to keep us busy. I mean, if I can 5,000 square feet of plaster in a month, well, that's great. What am I going to do the other 11
What am I going to do for the next 2 months? Yeah.
Or 11 months,
Yeah. It's funny, and that's the French commentary too. On this particular project, you guys, this is a different spray machine from mine. And we can have a whole nother class on why I think ours is the appropriate technology for the industry now. $150,000 spray machine that also costs $50,000 to learn how to use. So you're at 200 grand by the time you buy the machine and learn how to use it from this organization, which doesn't fit, unless we're building, tens of thousands of houses like this every year. That's really an appropriately sized technology. But the point that I was going to make is that on this project, you guys, this is right after I sprayed Project PA Hemp Home, which really was our first residential, full scale spray application. I showed up on this project and I shoveled rebound underneath Laurent, the guy that was spraying this, for 3 weeks. I was the only one on the job site that he ever handed the lance to, but I probably spent maybe a total of an hour and a half actually spraying on this project in 3 weeks. The rest of that time I was shoveling rebound. Jennifer was the project manager for the Hempcrete install. And I met a lot of the Hempstone folks for the first time there. But anyway, I put my time in shoveling rebound underneath Laurent, and the question to Laurent was, "Hey man, isn't there a way to eliminate having to shovel this shit up all the time?" And he said, "Well," and he pointed to me and he said, "Well, then this man wouldn't have a job." So that made me laugh, Tim, hearing you say that. Yeah, it's like, what do we do if we're so efficient at installing the plaster? So that's a mentality you share with the French pugilists, that going through the pain of shoveling rebound. If we didn't have the rebound, then I wouldn't have a job. So anyway, it's funny to hear you say. I know that's not what you meant either, Tim. But anyway, moving on. A couple other just good images for you all of, as a project is moving towards a state of completion, and how some of these membranes and materials can be employed and how they interact with each other. What you're seeing here is another product from 475 called Intello. Excuse me, on the previous slide, that was a scrap of it being used to cover a window. So that's not an indicative of a finished position for that material. But Intello is, again, a vapor permeable membrane that can be applied, a vapor permeable air tightness membrane that can be applied, in this case, on this retrofit, as the air tightness layer on the inside face, behind which, into the cavity, as evidenced by all these little tape holes, they did dense pack cellulose. So they actually pre-installed this Intello, put these spurring strips on, and then put the hose for the dense pack cellulose up into the cavity. The nice thing about the Intello is that it's translucent. So when they're doing dense pack cellulose, and one of the arguments against installing dense pack cellulose is that you can't see that it's depositing properly into that cavity. You don't know if you've left a void. In this case, with this Intello product, you can actually see the material. I know it's hard to see in the picture here, but you can see the dense pack cellulose having been properly installed back there. And then at this intersection right here, that same tape from this slide is used, and the sticky portion of it is taped off to the Intello, and then the mesh part drapes down onto the wall, so that once they did their interior lime plaster, actually, I think in this case it might have been clay, their base layer, they're connecting this field right here with the Intello to the field of the plaster, which is your air tightness layer on the interior wall here. Okay, so just an example for you all of how crazy this air sealing high performance building scene is. This is what it looks like as you're moving towards a point of completion. And just describing to you all how the interaction and how that joint is made in between your lime plaster air tightness barrier and your high performance passive house membrane up here, the Intello, so that once it's done, you've got that complete air seal on the inside. Now, one thing we didn't mention, and it begs the question, so what happens in a house when you have completely eliminated any airflow from the outside. You get a very stale environment on the inside, and you now have to introduce, I'm just going to skip that slide quickly. This little penetration right here is called an ERV. It's an air exchange system. So you have completely eliminated any airflow. In this case, again, a really good image of, even on the roof here, they did dense packed cellulose behind, but where the plywood is meeting each other, the different pieces of plywood, they put another layer of that tape to cover that joint. And then again, here you can see that same tape that I was describing taped off to the plywood. The mesh is now buried in this base coat of plaster. So they went to an extent of doing all this stuff and making it so airtight that, oh my God, we need air in the space now. So this is an air exchange system that helps to, exchange that interior air, basically that can get pretty stagnant if you've completely air sealed and you have really high-end German, triple pane windows that are air sealed. Now you need this thing, and it helps to keep the air fresh inside the space. So again, there's an argument here again to, you will get the performance that you want out of hempcrete. Do you really need to go as hard as air sealing everything? If you're in Massachusetts, this is the first 2 test panels that we ever did for David and the Hillside Center. Again, if you're in a state like Massachusetts where you are rewarded for having passed that R value test, or excuse me, having passed that air exchange test with the blower door, if you're rewarded monetarily for that, then you're going to go after all this stuff. So here again on these test panels, you can see Alex and the guys. This tape in this case was actually pre-installed. So that, it was taped off to the window buck. And I'm sorry I was looking for a good picture of that, but I couldn't find any. That same tape, again, this 50-50, sticky tape with the plaster mesh was pre-installed, taped off to the window buck here so that it could be folded back into the lime plaster to create that air seal around the window, right? And then again, here's the finished look. You don't ever end up seeing any of that tape. It's completely incorporated into the plaster layer and it's buried and hidden forever. But it's there and it's creating that air seal around this window now, so that once they put in these windows, which again for David are very expensive, high performance, triple pane windows from Germany, very durable too. Also, the amount of abuse that they went through before getting installed is pretty impressive, and they still function as expected. Again, here, just another example on a scale mock-up that we did to test the theory of could we spray on the flat plaster right away and then move them quickly. Here's just an example showing you all, how that looked and how that worked. So again, this is not to say that you have to do this with hempcrete, but when you're moving into, and as we're joining again, finding our way into the, what's happening in the larger construction industry, we don't want to be completely trapped in the DIY, natural building world. And I say that as though I have some venom for that scene. I don't at all. It's where we live, right? This is natural building, but we've got to find a way to make it palatable and make it play nicely with, these modern building techniques that people are employing to hit their energy performance requirements. So again, last look there at the beautiful cabins up in Taconic, New York. That lime plaster finish was installed by Hempstone with the help of Liz Jondro, who's up here in New England as well. And again, these projects, again, you guys, all 3 of these, not surprisingly, are some of the most high-end projects that we've ended up working on. The cabins in Taconic that were billed as farm worker housing, but in reality are super high-end architectural, not for farm worker housing. The Hillside Center here in Massachusetts, and then this also is in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. This retrofit, and then Michael's house on Cape Cod. Surprisingly, all but one of these projects is in Massachusetts, which seems to be a microcosm for hempcrete right now. But all right, I'll stop there if anybody has any questions. The next thing I was going to move into was the ASTM discussion around building grade herd. How are we doing on time, you guys?